Europe is at a crossroads. At the heart of the European Union's current crisis lies a question that has haunted Brussels for decades. Should Europe keep requiring unanimous agreement on the most sensitive decisions, or finally embrace qualified majority voting? The debate is not just about procedure. It is about sovereignty, enlargement, and whether the EU can act as a true geopolitical power in an increasingly dangerous world. Earlier in September, European Council President Antonio Costa tried to test the waters. He suggested replacing unanimity with majority voting for the very first step of accession talks with candidate countries like Ukraine and Moldova. His idea was simple. Opening negotiations would require only a majority, while closing them, the moment of full entry into the Union, would still require unanimity. The goal was clear. Costa wanted to outflank Hungary, whose Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has repeatedly used his veto to block Ukraine's progress, water down sanctions on Russia, and demand concessions from the rest of the EU. But Costa's proposal collapsed within days. The problem is that any expansion of majority voting itself requires unanimity. In other words, the very countries determined to keep their veto powers get to decide whether they lose them. And they said no. To understand why this matters, we have to go back to the beginning. When the EU's predecessor, the European Economic Community, was created in 1957, unanimity was the rule. The founders wanted to ensure that small countries like Luxembourg or Belgium could never be pushed aside by larger ones like France or Italy. Consensus was seen as essential to build trust. Over time, however, enlargement made unanimity unworkable. Every new member state added another potential veto. Reforms gradually expanded majority voting, especially after the 1986 Single European Act, which made it easier to build the single market. By the Lisbon Treaty in 2009, the current double majority system was in place, requiring 55% of states and 65% of the EU population to pass most laws. Today, around 80% of EU decisions use qualified majority voting. Yet some of the most sensitive areas, foreign policy, taxation, enlargement, and EU finances, remain under unanimity. And it is precisely here that the cracks are most visible. Between 2011 and 2025, member states blocked EU action at least 45 times. 15 of those vetoes happened just since 2024. Hungary accounts for nearly half of them. Orbán has turned the veto into a bargaining chip, threatening to block sanctions or enlargement unless Brussels releases withheld funds linked to democratic backsliding in Budapest. But Hungary is not the only one. Balkan states have used vetoes to block neighbours they have disputes with. France has resisted being outvoted on anything that touches sovereignty. And Cyprus has held up Turkey's accession for decades. The result is paralysis. In foreign policy, Europe has appeared hesitant and slow in the face of Russian aggression. In enlargement, candidate countries like North Macedonia and Ukraine see their futures hostage to the domestic politics of a single EU member. And in its global image, the EU risks looking like a powerless talking shop rather than a credible geopolitical actor. Why does this matter so urgently now? Because two forces collide at this moment: enlargement and war. The EU is negotiating with 6 candidates: Montenegro, Serbia, Albania, North Macedonia, Moldova, and Ukraine. Without reform, each stage of these talks will require unanimous approval, meaning any one state can freeze the entire process. Ukraine is the starkest test. For Kiev, joining the EU is not just a bureaucratic goal, but a strategic guarantee of survival. For Brussels, it is a matter of credibility. If Ukraine's path is blocked by a Hungarian veto, Europe will not only betray Ukraine, but also signal to Moscow and Washington that it cannot act in its own defense. That is why voices calling for reform are getting louder. Yet the path forward is unclear. 3 main ideas circulate in Brussels. The first is to expand qualified majority voting with new safeguards, such as stronger protections for minorities or mechanisms to appeal decisions. The second is Emmanuel Macron's vision of a multi-speed Europe, in which a core group of countries integrate more deeply, leaving others in looser arrangements. The third, more radical, is the idea of EU 2.0, starting over with a new treaty and leaving obstructionist states like Hungary outside. All three options face political resistance. But what is certain is that the EU cannot avoid the choice forever. Here lies Europe's sovereignty paradox. Unanimity is defended as a way to protect national sovereignty, yet it undermines the Union's collective sovereignty by leaving it unable to act decisively. In a world of war, climate shocks, and great power competition, paralysis is a luxury Europe can no longer afford. The crossroads is clear. Either the EU finds the courage to reform, or enlargement and credibility alike will grind to a halt. The question now is whether Europe's leaders are willing to risk losing a veto in order to gain a voice on the global stage. If you found this analysis helpful, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us reach more people. And for deeper articles on Europe, America, and the shifting world order, visit us at westernrelations.com.